Libby Squire was just a few steps away from her front door. She was returning home after a night out with friends, but then she was gone. The 21-year-old woman was kidnapped from her own front lawn. Women in the area were already terrified. There had already been a string of crimes against women in the area recently, and now it was feared that Libby had become a victim too. But no one could have known just how right they were. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if you love classic true crime without a bunch of AI garbage, you've come to the right place. So be sure to hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with all my future videos. It's 100% free. Liberty Ann Squire, better known as Libby, was born on January 1st, 1998 in Buckinghamshire. She was the oldest of 4 siblings and had an amazing relationship with her parents, Lisa and Russell. Libby was defined as a fun girl to be around. But even though Libby had an amazing group of friends, she struggled a great deal in high school. She battled with anxiety and depression and struggled with body image issues, even battling an eating disorder at one point. Libby was in a tough spot in high school, but she didn't give up. She picked herself back up and spent a lot of time getting her life back on track. This prompted Libby to pursue philosophy as a major in university. So after graduating from high school, Libby enrolled at the University of Hull, and she's having a blast there. University was the turning point in Libby's life. She finally started to come out of her shell, became more confident and happy, and she enjoyed the aspect of being an independent college student. Libby was also in a 3-year relationship with her boyfriend, Connor, and according to him, Libby was it for him. So Libby was having the time of her life, studying at university, exploring new places, discovering her unique personality, and doing what every other college student her age does, parties. This was exactly what she was doing on January 31st of 2019. It's bitterly cold in Hull in December and January, and almost a month after her 21st birthday, Libby made some plans with her friends to have a night out. Libby was at university when she found out that her friends were going out for drinks and dancing in Central Hull, so Libby joined in too. She got dressed in a black skirt and a matching jacket and she went out to meet her friends. But not before shooting a quick text goodnight to her boyfriend, Connor, and then leaving her phone at home. But for Connor, he could have never guessed that this text from Libby would mark the beginning of an enduring mystery. The fun started at around 9 p.m., and the group of friends had a few drinks, caught up on life, and chatted for a long time. Not long after, Libby and her friends made their way to The Welly, which is a nightclub in Central Hull. But Libby was not granted entry. See, the door security at The Welly was instructed not to let over-inebriated people inside, since they would cause a ruckus and likely get in trouble. This was bad for Libby, because she'd had a little bit too much to drink before arriving at The Welly and she wasn't allowed in. Libby was frustrated, but what could she do? She had no choice but to just go home, and her friends hailed her a cab and instructed the driver to take her home. Libby's friends then went back into the club instead of helping a drunk and confused Libby get back home. And this would later become something her friends would regret deeply. Now, I know what you're thinking. A highly intoxicated Libby is in a taxi with a stranger. This doesn't sound good. But the taxi driver was nothing but a gentleman, and he dropped Libby off right in front of her doorstep on Wellesley Avenue at about 11:30 p.m. Libby's friends had already paid for the taxi, so Libby stumbled out of it and the driver drove off. All Libby had to do was take a few steps from the pavement to her front door. But she wouldn't do that. Libby was right in front of her home when she made a U-turn in a drunken stupor and continued to walk down the street. She truly had no idea what was going on, completely alone and abandoned by her friends. In the process, Libby also dropped her house keys in front of the house, which would later be found by her friends. Libby was seen on surveillance cameras walking, or more like staggering and struggling to keep herself upright, half a mile away from home on Beverly Road at around 11:40 p.m. A lot of witnesses saw her. Some even remembered seeing a drunken Libby sobbing and crying in the street. Some people even witnessed Libby falling at one point and struggling to get up, but as far as we know, no one ever really stopped to help her out. But 2 good Samaritans did eventually step in, but they remembered Libby being very agitated and angry and refusing any help of any kind. So they couldn't do much other than just help her sit on a bench nearby and leave her there. Meanwhile, Libby's friends were at the club, and that was when they noticed something. A lot of time had passed, and Libby hadn't texted them to let them know that she'd gotten home. Now, they knew that Libby was drunk, but she always made sure to let her friends know when she reached home, so that they wouldn't worry. Well, that was when they started to do just that, worry. They were terrified that something had gone wrong, and this was why Libby hadn't texted them. They tried calling her phone, but if you remember, Libby had left it at home. We already know she wasn't home by this point, but her friends didn't know that yet, which is why all of her calls went unanswered. Libby's friends immediately ran out of the club and towards Libby's home, and they incessantly knocked on the door while trying to call out to her, but Libby wouldn't answer either her door or her phone. And that was when one of Libby's friends discovered the keys in the snow outside of her house. And that was when their fears took stronger root. Libby wouldn't just drop her keys like that, unless something bad had happened to her. Libby's friends wasted no time, and they got her parents and investigators involved right away. And 21-year-old Libby Squire was reported missing. Luckily, the investigators didn't give Libby's family or friends the typical wait 24 to 48 hours spiel. They were on the investigation from the minute Libby was reported missing. Something was amiss. The detectives initially thought that she'd run away after having a breakdown that night, but they couldn't say this for certain. Sure, Libby had struggled with mental health issues before, but what made her run away? Her parents and friends even claimed that Libby was very happy and she had plans that involved traveling and getting into journalism. She wasn't showing any signs of internal struggle or anything of that sort. So the investigators had no choice but to look around for other answers. The search for Libby was huge. It was actually the largest missing person search in the Humberside Police's history. There were more than 100 police officers actively looking for Libby, looking far and wide in remote areas, abandoned properties, hospitals, rivers, and even drainage systems. The investigators had to go through every single possible location before they could clear it in Libby's search. No stone left unturned. On the other hand, Libby's parents made countless public appeals, pleading with anyone to come forward with information on Libby and where she might be. The detectives were extremely worried for Libby, not just because she was missing, but it was deathly cold and the investigators were scared that she might fall victim to hypothermia, especially since she wasn't wearing pretty much anything to keep her warm. The police even went as far as describing Libby's clothes and making her attire public to help jog people's memories. They received a ton of tips, and the next thing they did was check CCTV cameras. Luckily, there was an abundance of surveillance cameras all over the city and near Libby's house, but the sheer number of cameras also meant that the investigators had to spend a lot of time going through the footage, finding Libby in them, and making a timeline of her movements. The Humberside detectives spent not hours, but weeks and months going through every single CCTV camera. And based on when the taxi driver had dropped her off, the investigators started to look at cameras all over the city of Kingston around 11:30 p.m. And not long after, they found Libby. She was seen walking on Beverly Road, and she was clearly drunk. She was staggering on the pavement, sometimes falling and then getting back up, and the police even saw the two men helping her. But they also saw something else. But this was hours before Libby was last seen. A silver Vauxhall Astra was driving around the same area, and it wasn't just once that investigators saw this car. It seemed like it was driving circles aimlessly. Well, at around midnight, the detectives saw Libby standing by a bus stop, trying to keep herself steady, and that was the exact moment that they saw the same silver car pull up close to Libby. CCTV cameras further showed a man stepping out of the car and even following Libby, first on the pavement across the road from her, and then he ran across the road and joined Libby. From the looks of it, it didn't seem like Libby knew this man, but they were talking. There was no push and pull, no fighting or resistance of that sort. All of this happened when Libby was walking back to the street that led to her house. A few minutes into the man talking with Libby, the two were seen walking away from the street where Libby's house was, and this was not looking good to the police. The investigators then looked at other surveillance cameras to get a close-up of Libby, the man, and his car. One camera caught Libby standing by the pavement where the silver car was, and the man in question was sitting in his car with the door open and his legs out. It seemed like they were still talking at this point. The police also realized that there were still cars on the street, and they assumed that the mysterious man was waiting for the cars to leave before he could do whatever he had set his mind on. A few minutes after midnight, at around 12:08 a.m., Libby got into the man's silver car. The man walked up to the driver's side, started up his car, and drove away. Now, since the camera was positioned in a certain way, only part of the car was visible. So the police, or anyone really, didn't know how Libby actually got into the car. Seeing this, the investigators decided to go to the exact area where the camera was. And after a bit of searching, they found something. Libby's watch. It was on the ground and discarded. And this could only mean one thing, and it wasn't good. Libby was likely forced into that car. The mysterious man might have used physical force to drag her into the car, knocking the watch off of her wrist in the process. The detectives also saw the car making its way to Oak Road playing fields around 12:11 a.m., which was a couple of minutes away from Beverly Road. And what was so chilling was the fact that it was a wooded, remote, dark, and vast piece of land. Well, the investigators finally had something. This man, his silver car, and where he was headed with Libby inside. But they still needed more information. So they headed for the very place where the car went, Oak Road playing fields, and where they questioned people about hearing or seeing anything out of the ordinary. Well, someone did come forward. A man who lived near that wooded area was awoken from his sleep by a woman's screams at about 12:15 a.m. This was just a few minutes after the car had pulled into that area. When the witnesses checked outside his window, he saw a man sprinting towards a silver car. The locals felt dread sinking into their bones. Investigators now knew that something terrible had happened to Libby. Finally, the last tip came in, and this was how the investigators caught on to the mysterious man, and finally knew who he was. See, the same night, on February 1st, at around 3 a.m., a little over 3 hours since the woman's screams were heard in Oaks Road playing fields, two women were walking down a deserted Beverly Road when they saw a man on the side of the road. They were in the middle of figuring out what to do when this despicable and disgusting excuse of a man traumatized these women by flashing them. These women were extremely uncomfortable, and they scurried past him, but this monster was having the time of his life, flashing himself inappropriately in the middle of the street. When the detectives took notice of the time, they went back to check their surveillance cameras, and sure enough, that creepy man was there. The investigators could clearly see his face and his car, and it was the same car that followed Libby around and that she was ultimately dragged into. After a couple of days, the police hit another jackpot by getting a clearer view of the car's license plate. And finally, they had a name. The man in question was 24-year-old Polish native Paweł Relowicz. So, who was this Paweł guy? Well, he was born in Poland, and in 2015 he moved to the UK. At the time of the case, Paweł worked as a butcher for Caro Food Group at a meat processing plant in Malton, North Yorkshire. He was married to a Polish woman named Jagoda, and the two moved to the UK together. Paweł and his wife had 2 kids together, and at the time of the case, his criminal record was clean as a slate. But that's not the entire truth. His crimes actually just hadn't made it onto police record yet. Paweł, even though he was described as a loving father and a cool guy to be around, was a creep, a pervert, and essentially a peeping Tom. He had some really perverse urges when it came to intimacy and pleasure, and he would indulge in things like voyeurism and inappropriate displays. He would creep into people's windows and people's houses and spy on women, girls, and even couples, which is a whole new level of creepy if you ask me. Paweł also had sticky fingers, and aside from stealing the usual valuables, he would steal women's undergarments, adult toys, and, of course, money. This guy was a real piece of work. What was so infuriating was the fact that he'd been doing all of this since 2017, so not even 2 years into his big move from Poland to the UK, but he was never reprimanded or arrested for any of his crimes. Even though women who were terrorized by Paweł reported the incidents and even fingerprints and DNA samples were taken, they didn't match anyone in the system. And this was what led Paweł to become emboldened. He was certain that he would get away with his crimes, and that made him arrogant. It turned out that Paweł lived very close to Libby, and he'd even committed a lot of non-consensual sex crimes like flashing himself in inappropriate displays in front of women on Libby Street. So even though Paweł never practiced his twisted dark fantasies in personal life, as far as we know, he was still a predator and made women feel terrified and uncomfortable. This was why police decided to arrest him on suspicion of taking Libby's life. All of the pieces fit. He had motive, means, opportunity, everything. So now it was time to question Paweł, and initially he denied knowing Libby. But when he was shown the footage of him following Libby, Paweł, in true suspect fashion, changed his story. He told the investigators that he was trying to help Libby that night and that he left her alone after dropping her off at Oak Road playing fields, which was obviously a lie. While keeping Powell in custody on suspicion of murder and more than 10 sexual offenses, the detectives still searched for Libby everywhere. The case was taking a dark turn, and as much as anyone didn't want to admit it, Libby had likely been a target of Powell that fateful night. Well, it was almost 2 months into Libby's disappearance on March 20th, 2019, when a fisherman in the Humber estuary found something. It looked like something floating in the water. When the investigators arrived, they retrieved the mysterious object that was floating, and sadly, it was a human body. Around the neck was a necklace with the letter L on it. Forensic reports positively identified the body as that of 21-year-old Libby Squire. Since the body was in very bad shape, it was impossible to determine the cause of death. She could have drowned, she could have been disposed of after passing away, or something else. We won't ever know, but she was tragically taken advantage of. That much we do know. DNA taken from Libby's body was a match to Powell, and now he couldn't deny what he had done to Libby anymore. Powell's trial was held on January 12th of 2021, and it lasted about 5 weeks. The prosecution argued that Powell was a dangerous predator with twisted urges and fantasies, and he was looking for a victim. Anyone who would satisfy his uncontrollable, disgusting urges. It's believed that Powell saw Libby on the streets, drunk out of her mind and vulnerable, and preyed upon her. He then forced her into his car, and when no one was looking, he took her to the remote wooded area where he forced himself on her and eventually took her life with his bare hands. He then tossed Libby's body into the cold River Humber like trash, and went home and enjoyed a steaming hot shower. One thing I'd like to point out here, though, is the timeline. If you remember, Libby was last seen on CCTV right around midnight, yet Powell was caught exposing himself to those 3 women at about 3 a.m., meaning these women were not just visually assaulted by this pervert, they came in disturbingly close contact with a murderer just hours after he'd claimed a young woman's life, and this revelation was haunting. Despite all this, the defense team argued that Powell had nothing to do with Libby's murder, and that he dropped her off at the playing fields even though his DNA was all over and inside of Libby's body. Why they wasted their time on such a ridiculous defense is beyond me, but soon enough, the verdict was found. On February 11th, 2021, Powell Relowich was found guilty of the sexual assault and murder of Libby Squire, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 27 years. Powell's wife divorced him shortly after and moved back to Poland with their kids, which honestly good for her. I just hope that this man never gets out of jail, because even if he does get out in his 50s, which is a possibility, there's no doubt in my mind that he will terrorize women again. Following Libby's tragic passing and the way she was targeted by an evil and vile monster who had it out for women and treated them like disposable objects of pleasure, Libby's mom, Lisa, has advocated and raised her voice against crimes of indecent nature. Even though things like voyeurism and flashing are non-contact sexual offenses, things can escalate pretty quickly, as they did in Libby's case. Not only this, but these incidents are incredibly scarring. It doesn't matter if you touch someone or not, the mental damage can follow someone for the rest of their life. The purpose of Lisa's campaign is to take these crimes and the offenders seriously, give them harsh sentences before they can ruin more lives, or worse, take them. Truly, Lisa and Russell's hearts died after Libby's passing, and they don't want any other woman, or anyone for that matter, to go through this ever again. Lisa has even raised her voice against high-profile murderers like Wayne Couzens, who was a serving Metropolitan Police officer and a stage 10 creep, predator, and serial assaulter who took advantage of and murdered Sarah Everard in March of 2022. A woman who, just like Libby, was just minding her own business and walking down a quiet London road to her home. I know I sound like a broken record, but violent crimes against women keep escalating to newer extremes as time goes on. This needs to stop. Libby didn't deserve what happened to her, when all she was doing was going back home after a night out. No one deserves what this woman went through. The only saving grace in this situation is that for Libby, her pain, her suffering, her anguish, everything that she went through that evening is now finally over. But now her family is the one who has to bear the burden of this grief, this resentment, and the undying hatred for a man who took an innocent woman's life, and the decades that she had left to spend with her loved ones, all for a few minutes or likely seconds of brief satisfaction. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Dana Eldathiel and Brandy Owens. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you can access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it is a great way to support the channel and help out. I appreciate all of you guys that have decided to do that. And if you also want to join, you can click that big join button below the video or find a link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also now available. You can grab one of those from a link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered. And don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free. It just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.